an original.
From Story Studio Network.
I'm Dave Trafford.
I'm Erin Trafford. Welcome to this episode of Canadian Forestry Can Save the World. This is the podcast series where we explore the role the forestry industry can play in fighting climate change.
Now, we've spent a lot of time over the past few episodes focusing on the new tech applications, the new and innovative thinking, how the new science and the 21st century forest management practices have come around to embrace the traditional practices of First Nations and Indigenous communities.
That Indigenous ethic not only puts the health and well-being of the planet at the center of our relationship with the forest, it insists, in fact, demands, we have a responsibility to leave this world better off than we found it.
So we want to take that notion a step further and look more deeply at MLTC Industrial Investments in Saskatchewan as a living, breathing, thriving example of how that ethic is practiced.
And more to the point, MLTC's central focus and commitment to a healthy, resilient, renewable forest has proven, by any measure, to be an extraordinary economic success.
MLTC is the Meadow Lake Tribal Council.
The Meadow Lake Tribal Council, many years ago, over 40 years ago, purchased North Sask Forest Products.
We met Tina Rasmussen in our last episode of the podcast.
My name is Tina Rasmussen. I'm the Chief Business Officer for MLTC Industrial Investments.
Tina is part of the leadership team at MLTC Industrial Investments. The company has grown over the past 40 years out of the council's decision to buy North Sask Forest Products.
Our leaders back at that time knew that would give them the forest tenure, and if they had control over the forest tenure, plus they had purchased the industry that those logs were going to end up at, they could control many, many other things. Push ahead 40 years, and now the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, through its corporation, its partnership with Paper Excellence, that corporation was able to have direct influence over the way things look now in our traditional territory.
Now, today, MLTC has grown the business to include North Wind Forest Products, the MLTC Solar Energy Farm, and the MLTC Bioenergy Center.
It also has interests in an Indigenous petroleum wholesale marketer and an Indigenous-owned broadband internet service provider.
We wouldn't have had that opportunity if we weren't sitting at the table.
And today, MLTC is one of the larger employers in Saskatchewan.
So if you were to look at the revenue generation by just the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, I mean, between our industrial facilities and the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, we have over 600 jobs. We're one of the largest employers in Northwest Saskatchewan.
MLTC boasts more than 600 workers at all of their facilities, and all because, as Tina says, the Tribal Council has a seat at the table.
When you're in an equity position, it's entirely different because you sit at the table. They've got to answer to you. You have a say over who gets hired, who gets fired, what contractors make it, and which contractors don't make it.
And we can't overstate how important the Indigenous ethic is to the success of a company like MLTC.
We're not the owners of this world. We're only here for a very brief time.
It's a matter of stewardship of the land versus ownership of the land. It's based on the traditional wisdom imparted by the community elders.
Our elders tell us we should always leave it better than the way we found it.
Leave it better than the way we found it.
Right now we have our elders gathering from all our 9 First Nations talking exactly about this.
I managed to catch up with Richard DeRocher.
I'm the Vice Chief of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council. My name is Richard DeRocher.
He's a Vice Chief at Meadow Lake.
I've been involved with the Tribal Council now for 6 years. Previous to that, I was a band counselor in Find Us First Nation for about 20 years.
He spent most of his adult life involved with the Tribal Council and working in the MLTC forestry operations. And we just happened to connect on the same day The Meadow Lake leadership and elders were gathering to review their forestry operations.
Right now, we have our elders gathering from all our 9 First Nations talking exactly about this. How do we even do better? How can we even do better?
You have managed to bring together 9 different First Nations to do this. And on the surface, that might sound like, well, that was easy. There must have been challenges in there to make sure everybody was on the same page around the same table, having their say, but with respect.
Absolutely. I mean, we experience inside of our own tribal council. Each of our nations is trying to do the best that it can do for their individual communities. But at the same point in time, those communities have to look at each other and look at where there's opportunity to create something collective.
In terms of the 9 communities coming together, yes, we did have some good disagreements, or some good, I wouldn't say disagreements, some good conversations. But in the end of the day, with the respect for each other, we came out of it in a good way. And the chiefs at the time, I have so much respect for the chiefs that I see today, because they were the trendsetters. They're the ones that had the vision. They're the ones that led the way. It's for us just to follow it now.
Kudos to our leadership that had the forethought, that understood that unless they controlled it, they were never going to get anywhere with it. But it's a 40-year story.
Now, whether it was by sheer wisdom of forethought or simply just good fortune, MLTC really amounts to a 40-year overnight success that was seeded by the original founders' commitment to being good stewards of the forest.
The chiefs at the time had that discussion to make sure that we had a say in how we harvested, how much wood came in the partnerships that we achieved, and as much control as we possibly can in order to have that success.
Are any of the elders who were involved in that original conversation still involved in this discussion today?
Yes, there is. There were some chiefs at the time that are still around the table. They're not as chiefs anymore. They're more as elders. They're more as advisors. In fact, I shook hands with 3 of them this morning that were chiefs in their community at that time. And this morning, here they are talking about how we're going to do better. What's our next steps? All those questions we've got to answer.
The focus on the health and well-being, the sustainability, the resilience of the forest is obviously front and center in this conversation. Tell me what it's meant to the First Nations communities in terms of their own health and well-being.
Well, this morning, as I was in a pipe ceremony this morning, we talked about that with the elders that were there in the pipe ceremony and myself. And we talked about sustainability. We talked about how we're going to move forward and still look at our old practices of looking after Mother Earth, but moving forward with an economy. That's very important. Buffalo River is one of our Dene communities. We have 4 Dene communities and 5 Cree communities. And Buffalo River decided to use their dividends towards building themselves a health center, detox center, a youth center, and a wellness center. And that's what that means when you're involved in that. You can get dividends, and you can put money where the government doesn't see your need, and your own source revenues to make sure that you get the things that you. A lot of our own source revenue goes to housing because of the huge housing shortage that we have in our communities. So those are some of the things, how the First Nations prosper and help out with their wellness.
So based on that, I mean, it's an economic stability that you're talking about. You're able to actually prioritize and say, this is where this money is needed and where we're able to spend that dividend. How has your relationship with the government changed over that period of time?
Oh, I think it's a marvelous relationship. I think it kind of eases the pressure on the government because they know that Meadow Lake Tribal Council is doing well. They do. We're very proactive in whatever we do, and we're also based on partnerships. So that I think the government is really supportive of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, both federal and provincial government. We do have some hiccups at times on jurisdictional issues, but we do it in a good manner and talk to the governments and try to come to conclusion to them.
Is there anything in that that slows you down? Because it sounds, the model that you have developed, whether it's by accident or design, sounds fairly leading edge right now. It sounds innovative in many respects in terms of how Indigenous First Nations communities are involved in the natural resources economy. It's a model that we could use and roll out across the country.
We've heard this story somewhere before.
Right?
We've heard this before. And to us, it's so simple. And, as in terms of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council and who we are, we're kind of a humble bunch, and we like to keep on low key. We don't like to go brag around town. We just like to keep moving forward, keep it low key without blowing our own whistles and blowing our own horns and that. That's kind of who we are.
Yeah, your self-deprecation and your humility is remarkable, and I think that's an important part of the character of everything that's going on. I dare say there are people who will say that you are a part of the problem in terms of developing it because you're not banging the drum loud enough to say, look at what we have done here, and we should be doing it elsewhere.
Well, that's just, we've been told that, and I know that the chiefs at the table and the leadership of this organization, who is owned by the 9 First Nations, we like to keep low key, and I don't know how else to say it. It's who we are.
Tell me what's on the table then. Yeah. Is there something that's really kind of out there that you guys are thinking, we need to look into this in terms of research, or we're doing work with universities, or what's going on there?
We are looking at a way to capture the carbon credits, to sustain being even more green, because that's our goal, is to be green, right? Because we're taking from Mother Earth, and we have to replace exactly what we took out. We have to reforest. We do the reforesting through our Mystic Management, who manages the forest, whom we own 51% of, and the other 49% is owned by the pulp mill, local pulp mill, Meadow Lake Mechanical Pulp, and so that's part of reforestation. Now, how are we going to cover our tracks even more? And that's by using total 100% of the log. And I believe we're doing some research right now on some different avenues that's going to allow us to do that. We haven't figured it out totally yet. We've been talking to some pretty smart people that in that side of the world that deals with carbon credits, deals with how we get the most out of our biomass now. The biomass is our next step. How do we get the next step out of our biomass?
Now, are you using the biomass to fuel any of your facilities?
We are using the biomass. We sell back some power to Sask Power, and then with the excess heat and power we use, we heat up our kiln dryer to dries our lumber. We use it to heat that, so we're easing off on the natural gas usage, as well as I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but we do use a little bit of excess power for our mill.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me as I hear these projects sort of unfold, and they go from really local, obviously, to opportunities to say, well, if we're doing this locally, we could create a network, and you can actually expand the benefits of all of that use beyond the plant, for example. Is there any conversation around, getting into things like district heating or any of that sort of next level of that use of the biofuel?
Well, we're always talking at the table how we can get involved in that, because the North is very unique. When we had a power outage this summer, 3 days. That's how the North is. So how do we make it more safer in our communities to have sustainable power, right? And one that I'd like to look at is the small nuclear reactors, or the mini nuclear reactors, or micro. How is that possible for us to get involved with, and how is that? What does that mean for us in northern Saskatchewan? How many houses could we do with one of those little reactors? And because the uranium comes out of our territory, and then it goes way down south somewhere, and they use it over there. Then we end up getting it somehow back, right? So in usage. I mean, I don't mean the raw material back or the spent material back. So how do we use that? It's right out of our back door. How do we use the stuff that's in our back door? That's my thoughts, and that's the one thing that I hope that we look at in the future.
So what have we learned from this success of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council?
We've learned MLTC is a model of Indigenous ownership and control of the forest and other natural resources in their traditional territories.
It's a model that allows each of the 9 nations to benefit from economic dividends to be then reinvested into their communities.
It's millions of dollars that helps them build and support health facilities and youth programming.
And above all, it addresses the housing shortage in those communities.
It's economic development that generates its own momentum.
On average, we're giving the communities probably about a little better than $1 million a year. And that's 9 communities, and we keep a little bit in our pot at on our economic development arm. So I would say that would average about $300,000 a home, maybe $350,000 a home. So that's building 4 homes, on average, plus what the communities have saved in their own. That's coming from our corporate side. Every community has their own corporate side as well too, because as we grow, guess what happens? The communities have the same mentality, the same mindset, and they go on their own projects. So they're growing as well too, in this economic development thing. So it's a tumbleweed kind of thing, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So they've got their own source revenues as well too. So this all coming together, they might build five homes that they would never get in their communities now. Previously, you had to wait for I come from Flying Dutch First Nation. As I indicated, I was in council for quite a few years. And there we had about $285,000 a year for the last 20 years in housing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in that you have to renovate a few homes. In that you have to, in Flying Dutch, we insure all our homes. So insure 210 homes, 220 homes, as well as you got to try to build some new homes. You do the math.
Yeah,
it doesn't
go very far, right?
It doesn't work out.
That own source revenue for housing goes above and beyond any funding committed by Ottawa as well, which then eases pressures on the government and provides opportunities for new partnerships. And
with that comes new business development.
Now we have 3 of our communities with forestry companies. We have Waterhen Lake First Nation, who's a Cree community, Kennel Lake First Nation, who's a Cree community, as well as Buffalo River Dene Nation, just embarking in the forestry industry, and they're a Dene community. So we have communities that are actually getting involvement. Then we have contractors from just about every community that are involved in the forestry sector. Either they own a loader, or they own a skidder, or they own trucks. They're involved in the industry.
And it's benefiting and supporting hundreds, if not thousands, of families.
I'd say there's probably about 2,500 families that rely on the forestry industry in our territory.
It creates a sustainable economic foundation for the First Nations and the Indigenous people in Saskatchewan. And that's good for the province as a whole.
Saskatchewan has seen many forest companies in, then out. The First Nations people that live in the boreal forest, have they been in and out? They were here 1,000 years ago, and they'll be here 1,000 years from now. And I think that's an important piece of it.
The economic impact and benefits of Indigenous ownership, that's one thing. But there's also a cultural impact and benefit that doesn't show up immediately on that bottom line of a balance sheet.
The good thing about it is our young people are now achieving these jobs. I think it's 72%, I believe, is Indigenous in our facilities. And of that 72%, just under 50% is First Nation. To us, that's one of the biggest things. We have our kids now working in the mills. We have them doing some moving up to management. It's going to take some time that we get to the management skills, but we are moving in that, and that's been very strong in the last 5-6 years.
The young people who are growing up in these communities are now growing into these jobs. They're growing into management positions. And that only serves to strengthen the stability and the sustainability of the work being done by MLTC.
And it all started 40 or so years ago because the chiefs and elders of the day understood the importance and benefits of having a seat at the table.
So where's it going to go? 40 years from now, I mean, this won't just happen at the same pace because the focus on forestry, the focus on climate, the focus on making sure we take care of the planet, because if we don't take care of her, she's going to kill us. It's not that we're going to kill the planet. Where's this going to go for Meadow Lake in the next 40 years?
Well, I think it's going to be a continuation of what we're doing, making sure that we're covering our footprints, making sure that we're respecting Mother Earth, making sure we're giving back to Mother Earth, making sure that we are, we're moving in all sectors. We can't just live off one sector. We can't live just off forestry. We've got to diverse into other sectors, such as I mentioned, nuclear. Something of the sort. All the new trends that are happening out there. We've got to be up front and center to those.
As quiet as you may want to be about it, I think it's going to be hard to keep this quiet.
When I look back and I see what made it successful, it's the respect that we have around the table. It's the 9 First Nations come together. It's the brotherhood that's there. Of course, we all got different needs. We all have different things that are affecting our communities, and we try to help each other out. If community's having trouble in a certain area or something, we try to help that community out. And that's the beauty of being the central part of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council. We can assist one community that's in a bad way at that time. And it's okay with the other 8 communities, because someday it's going to be one of the other 8 communities. I believe that's the whole strength of it all, is the respect that we have for each other, the respect that we have for each other's communities, and the willingness to work together and the willingness to help each other out.
Yeah, it rises all the boats, right?
That's right.
Good and thoughtful stewardship of the land translates into good and thoughtful stewardship of the community based on Indigenous ownership and control of the forest resources. And that has everything to do with the relationship the 9 nations of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council have with Mother Earth.
I don't know other way to say it. We're the right people for the job.
They're the right people for the job, yeah. And as Tina Rasmussen points out, MLTC's place in the world changes the way government and corporate Canada should be looking at First Nations and Indigenous business.
People look at MLTC and say, oh, well, you guys are different than other nations. Bullshit. Quite frankly. You just choose to look at us differently because we've taken the bull by the horns and done something on our own.
So really, we've only brushed the surface of the success story and the community impact resulting from the work being done by the Meadow Lake Tribal Council. You might want to check out the website where you can visit them at mltcii.com.
And if this is the first time you've listened to Canadian Forestry Can Save the World, we'd encourage you to dip back into the rest of the series.
And while you're there, leave us a comment, maybe a question, and drop us a rating.
For our producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler, for Aaron Trafford and the whole team at SSN, I'm Dave Trafford. This podcast series is produced for Forestry for the Future. And for more information, I'd encourage you to visit the website forestryforthefuture.ca. And you may want to get involved in supporting a sector that's committed to growing a greener economy and driving our country towards a net zero carbon future for you and your kids. I'm Dave Trafford, and Canadian Forestry Can Save the World is produced by Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.